The first of our two stories begins over 2,000 years ago in eastern India, for it was there that a baby prince was born to a royal couple. The new parents named their child Siddhartha. Siddhartha's mother and father loved him so much that they wished to shield him from all that was unpleasant outside the walls of their palace. So he grew from child to man like a bird kept in a gilded cage, surrounded only by that was beautiful. One day, Siddhartha grew curious about the people and land beyond the confines of his home, and so he demanded that his servants take him out into the countryside that lay naked and raw beyond the palace gate. There, for the first time in his life, the prince saw the frail and the weak. He saw the poor and the hungry. He saw the sick and the dead. So overcome with sadness upon seeing such things, Siddhartha left his royal life behind and roamed penniless about the land in an attempt to understand how life could be so good to some and so cruel to others. In his travels, he met many wise and spiritual people, but none were able to provide him with the answer he sought. So one day he decided that he would sit and meditate under a tree until the flesh rotted off his bones, if need be, until he gained an understanding into the way of the world. And while he sat, he entered into a great trance and did battle with all the evil demons embedded deep within his subconscious until his mind became empty of all earthly things. It was at this moment Siddhartha became enlightened. It was at this moment he became the Buddha. Now, as one truly awake for the first time since his birth, the Buddha dedicated the rest of his life to compassion for all living things and to educate others about the Four Noble Truths, and thus the religion of Buddhism was born. The first noble truth is that life is full of suffering. We all get sick, we all grow old, and we all die. Buddhism teaches that most of us are trapped in a cycle of continuous birth, death, and rebirth, a process called reincarnation. If in life we are unkind, say we are abusive to a dog, the laws of reincarnation hold that it is possible that we will be reborn a dog that is subjected to abuse. This belief is known as karma, or the law of cause and effect. What comes around goes around. The second noble truth is that our suffering is caused by desire. We crave material and emotional things that we think will make us happy, only to discover that the more we have, the more we want, and the more we want, the more unhappy we become. The third noble truth is detachment. That is, it is possible to minimize or end one's suffering by becoming unattached to all the material and emotional desires. The fourth noble truth is called the Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, and right mindfulness. The Eightfold Path is a way to reach a state of living so that everything one does has an outcome that causes a good effect, or good karma. Once this is achieved, then the cycle of birth and death is broken, and one attains a state of Buddhahood, or nirvana. Buddhists believe that the practice of meditation is key to living the Eightfold Path. Buddhists also believe that there are some special spiritual people who attain Buddhahood but choose to be reborn again and again so that they can teach others the way of compassion for all living things. These people are known as bodhisattvas, or living Buddhas. And this understanding now brings us to the reason for this assembly. Academy science teacher Rachel Sanders. Her story begins like this. In 1933, the 13th living Buddha of Tibet, known as the Dalai Lama, died. Tibetan Buddhists close to him, knowing that, as a bodhisattva, he would be reborn, began to search the Tibetan countryside for his rebirth. They were guided by certain signs, dreams, and visions. Eventually, they were led to the house of a 2-year-old boy. Once there, they explained to the toddler's mother what brought them, and she agreed to allow her son to be put to the test to determine if he had been born the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet. The spiritual leaders placed many articles before the boy that belonged to their former master, but they also placed many articles that did not belong to him. They asked the child to choose among the items. In every case, the boy chose the articles that belonged to the 13th Dalai Lama. The Tibetans then knew that they had found the rebirth of their living bodhisattva. The child was eventually taken to the Tibetan capital of Lhasa and enshrined as the 14th Dalai Lama, where he would rule the country as both its spiritual and political leader from the Potala Palace. In 1950, when the 14th Dalai Lama was 15 years old, Chinese soldiers invaded Tibet. The goal of the Chinese government was to make Tibet part of China and strip the Dalai Lama of all political power. The young bodhisattva resisted the Chinese and even traveled to Beijing in 1956 to meet China's leader Mao Zedong. However, his efforts to maintain Tibetan independence failed. The Dalai Lama's advisors told him to consult the Tibetan oracle, a spiritual leader believed to be able to fall into a deep trance and see the future. Twice the Dalai Lama sought out the oracle in 1959 and asked him if he should flee Tibet, and twice the oracle told him to stay. The third time the Dalai Lama asked the oracle the question, the oracle replied, "Leave tonight." Right after that meeting, the Chinese army began to shell the Dalai Lama's city. That night, under the cover of darkness, the Dalai Lama and his government escaped Tibet and walked over the Himalayan mountains into India, the birthplace of the Buddha. The Indian government allowed the Dalai Lama to set up his spiritual and political government in exile, where both he and it remain today. His new capital in India is called Dharamsala. Recently, the Dalai Lama gave this talk on his discovery of science as a young boy by way of a telescope.
So, sometimes my scientific scientist friend, you see, they describe me, they cause of comparison, Galileo than not comparison.
His Holiness, some of the scientist friends compare Galileo's looking through the telescope with the young Dalai Lama looking at moon through a telescope.
I found moon, you see, some rocks, some mountains. Then I noticed shadow of these mountains. About after sunset, naturally sun west side. So light come from sun. Because of that, shadow of these mountains are eastward, on the other side. So then I convinced moon have its own light. Usually, you see, we Tibetan, and also even some sort of literature mentioned moon also have its own light, like that. So then, no longer believe that. Actually, I saw like that. So I quite bold. One day, I invited my own tutor. Of course, I very much respect. Now, I invite both of them, and I set up the telescope and invite them. Please look at moon, whether there's its own light or not. Then the both teacher, you see, look, then say, oh, no light. Moons appears as a light come from other source, not moon itself. So, as a young student, made a little contribution for conversion of my learned two teachers' view. Clear?
On one of the last pages of his autobiography titled Freedom in Exile, the Dalai Lama wrote, "With the ever-growing impact of science in our lives, religion and spirituality have a greater role in reminding us of our humanity. There is no contradiction between the two. Each gives us valuable insights into the other. Both science and the teachings of the Buddha tell us of the fundamental unity of all things." Last month, Rachel Sanders flew from the United States to Delhi, India. She then boarded this plane and flew to Dharamsala, the home of the Dalai Lama. What follows is her story.